It would seem we need just a little bit more storage here. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty straightforward down and dirty storage cabinet to go with the desk in my wife's quilting room. It'll be about 36 inches wide, 30 inches tall, and 11 inches deep. I'll add 3 small drawers to the bottom and a couple of floating shelves inside. So the lumber of choice in this one is walnut. And I'm milling things a little differently than I normally would. I'm cutting to some rough widths here, and I'm only edge joining and then taking it over to the table and gluing up in panels. And I'm doing this because my machines are big enough to handle the width of this cabinet. So it just saves me a little work, and I have the machines to do it. So once I have the 6 panels for this case all glued up and cured, then I come back to the joiner to get one face flat, and I will touch up one edge while I'm there, and then go over to the planer to make the other side parallel to the face, and then go ahead and trim to final width. From there I'll take it over to the chop saw and go ahead and cut these panels to length. Next up is back to the table saw with a dado stack in the machine and a zero clearance fence so that I can cut the rabbets on the corners as well as the dados for the center shelf. And then I can get this all dry fit and mark for the dividers on the drawers as well as the center panel. So I wanted to glue in the drawer dividers in the bottom only at this point so that I could remove that middle shelf and make it easier to put the drawer glides on. This was a little trickier than I thought it was going to be, but I finally got the job done. And with that all drawing in clamps, I could go ahead and turn my attention to some zebra wood over at the bandsaw, where I resawed some 6/4 material down to make my 3 drawer fronts in a continuous grain match. And the last thing to do to the inside before gluing this all up is the shelf pins. I line these shelf pin holes with some stainless steel liners, which I think really just dress up the cabinet and give it a little bit more of a classy look. This is the first time I've used these, and I really like them. And that brings us to the big glue up here. I'm still not going to glue in that shelf above the drawers because it's such a tight area to get the drawer glides in. But I will glue up everything else and just set those panels in place to make sure that everything stays square and true, and I can get the shelf in there later. And I ended up being just a little bit out of square, but nothing that a little squeeze from the corner clamp wouldn't bring back into alignment and make everything just perfect. So I ended up coming back and taking that corner clamp off and dropping that center shelf in, although I didn't glue it, but just to keep everything aligned. I was able to slide it back far enough so that I had access to the screw holes, but I wasn't actually able to get it all the way out. I probably could have forced it, but I chose not to do it. Blum undermount 9-inch soft close glides for this cabinet. I'm just a huge fan of these glides and the amount of adjustments that they have and all that good stuff. So next up was the back panel. Admittedly, I was not originally going to put this in, but I decided to go ahead and drop the rabbet in here and then clean up the corners with the chisel and put some scrap walnut plywood that I had laying around in the shop in place. I didn't have enough material to do it in one solid piece, but that center divider gave me a nice place to go ahead and put this in two pieces. Just tacked it in with some brad nails and a little bit of glue. And that moves us on to the drawers. I had some leftover poplar material from the sit stand desk that we did for this same area, so that worked out well for the drawer material. Here I'm just grooving these for some 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood bottoms, and then recessing some 5/16 holes for plugs, and construction will be glue and screws, and then I will come back and plug them with walnut plugs. I've said many times you don't need the fancy Blum jigs to install Blum hardware, and the same goes here. I'm just using the parts themselves as the jigs that I need and getting the Blum hardware installed. Using a 5/16 inch plug cutter, I'm just using some of the leftover scrap walnut to cut the plugs, and then I will glue and install those in the drawers, flush trim them off, and of course sand everything up just so that it looks nice. And the last construction piece for this build is of course the doors. Typical shaker doors, frame and panel, the little mortise and tenon. I groove them at the table saw, making sure to flip them over so that the groove is perfectly centered on the material, and then I will come back with the miter gauge to cut the tenons to fit those grooves, and then dry fit so that I can measure for the panel stock to go in these doors. And with all these parts fitting exactly correctly, I can go ahead and add glue to the tenons. Only the tenons, the panels in this one will float, and then I can get them all clamped up and set them aside to dry, and maybe take a look at some drawer fronts. So finally back to those zebra drawer fronts that we resawed earlier. Admittedly, I was back and forth between the saws and the hand planes a few times to get these to fit just correctly. And I used the center screw for the hardware to secure the drawer front. And then I removed the drawer and added screws from the inside to permanently secure the drawer front. And then I removed that temporary screw and went ahead and installed the actual drawer pull hardware. With the doors out of clamps, I could go ahead and drill for the Euro hinges that will be on these doors. This is called a Headache jig, I believe is the correct pronunciation of it, and it does a really nice job. If it has a fault, you just have to clean it out after each use. So the finish on this one is going to be Osmo, purely because I had still some left in a can in the shop that I wanted to use up before it went bad. Admittedly, I am not a huge fan of the Osmo. I just don't think it produces as smooth a finish as, say, a Rubio does or some of the other hard wax oils. Additionally, and it could have been because my can was a little bit older, the off-gassing seemed to stick around a lot longer than some of the other hard wax oil options do. And there's the finished cabinet. It was a little heavier than I thought it was going to be, and it did take my wife and I both to get this one put up on the wall. It is screwed directly to some studs in the wall, so it's certainly not coming down. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, take care.